Hey, I'm Randy with Tachtronics. Today I'm going to show you how to customize your 03 to 07 GM instrument cluster. This is all full-size pickups and SUVs like Suburbans, Tahoes, Yukons, Escalade. If you don't know how to pull your cluster, I've got another video up on my channel on how to remove it from your vehicle. So we're going to start with the cluster already removed. I recommend I've got a little pry tool, unclipping starting at the top. I'm kind of putting pressure on both the rear cover and the lens. There you go, flip it over. And we'll remove the rear lens, or the rear cover first. The lens, this is probably the toughest part of disassembly. You're gonna go from underneath this tab on the lens. You shouldn't just straight up push down on the circuit board because you can do a little bit of damage that way. If you can get underneath that tab and just pull up and then separate. Again, get underneath, pull up, separate. And it looks like there we go. All right. I recommend actually putting this back in your rear cover. It holds the circuit board in place when you're marking your needle positions. Masking tape is nice because it's obviously it's white, so you can just see your pen marks easier later. Now just get a pen or pencil. I find it easiest to just look down the length of the needle. Put a mark. You're gonna want to turn it counterclockwise until it stops. Don't push it hard, because you can mess up the position of the needle. But just turn until you'll feel it when it stops. I'm honestly not being very careful right now because I'm going to use a different face later anyway. But if you intend to use the same gauge face, I really recommend not touching the screen windows because those are kind of the easiest to scratch. Now we're going to take a pry tool. You can use, if you don't have something like this, you can use a fork. Use, just something that you can pry with. And you're just going to gently lift up. Depending on what style stepper motor you have, if you don't have the latest X27s, there is a chance that you're going to possibly pull out the stepper shaft. But most of the time that's not a problem. All right, we're gonna remove that rear cover again. Okay. So we are not going to do stepper motors on this one since we're customizing. We're going to remove all the backlighting bulbs. These top two are signals. The one on the left is cruise control, so those don't necessarily need to be replaced if you're just doing backlighting. But we're just going to heat up each side of the bulb. Just gently lift and they will come right off. Alright, we got the old backlighting bulbs off. By each bulb there are 4 little pads, but you can tell which two the bulbs were soldered to. So we're going to add some solder to each of those pads. You'll understand a little bit later why. So here we can see it's the bottom and top. Doesn't need to be a ton of it. Just so that you have a nice little bead that covers that pad. It doesn't hurt to you have a fume absorber, that's helpful, but not a must. If you can just be in a place that's well ventilated, that will help or be nice. All right, now we're ready to install the LEDs. We're gonna go with blue today. LEDs are polarity sensitive, so you'll have to pay attention to what side is positive and negative. If you buy your LED kit from Tachtronics, we include a polarity diagram that shows you which side is positive, which side is negative. So let's get these guys on. So we're just gonna hold down. You can do it with your fingers, but I use tweezers just so that I don't burn myself. Basically, you're just gonna hold the LED down to the two pads where you just added some solder to it. Just hold it down, remelt it a little bit, hold it for a second or two, and then press down on the other side. Again, remelt the solder, hold it down for a couple of seconds, let it go, and you can see they're never going anywhere. They're nice and tight. Some clusters have a bulb or LED here. Basically, if you have a transmission temp gauge, you'll want a bulb or LED there in that bottom corner. Otherwise, there's no point. So again, just melting, holding, again, melting, holding, pressing. See, they're nice and tight. Just do this a few more times. And make sure, this is probably the closest one. Just make sure that your leads are not hanging over and touching something else on the circuit board. You don't want to short it out. Difficulty level, I feel like doing your own LEDs is quite a bit easier than doing the stepper motors. The main problem I see, mistake people make when they try to work on their own cluster, I would say 9 out of 10 times they screw up with installing the stepper motors. They're quite a bit more fragile than these LED pads. So if you're not comfortable soldering, it's probably better to let a professional do it for you. But if you're somewhat comfortable with it, I've heard people, I had a customer a while back, said she and her, I think she said 12-year-old son did this together as a project. So I think most of you would be okay installing your own LEDs. All right. So make sure that the bead kind of covers the lead well, or is making good contact. So there you go, they're never going anywhere. You can see they're all nice and tight, nothing's popping loose. Clean the screens, or the digital readouts, before I put it back together. So we're just gonna, you don't want to use a ton of cleaner, but just put a little bit on your rag, wipe it off. Okay, it's time to put it back together. All right, we're gonna put our housing back on. So if you are gonna stick with your same gauge face, then obviously you have your marks for each needle. So what you're gonna do is just, I typically put a needle at just facing straight up, and then you're going to rotate counterclockwise until you get back down to that mark that you made earlier. And that's how you're gonna recalibrate them. In this instance, we're actually going to upgrade a little bit more, and we're going to install an SS gauge face. Here we go. We got an SS. It's got 3 little tabs. It's got one on the top, one on the left side, one at the bottom right. I'm just gonna snap those in. All right, we got a few different options on needles. We've got a blue with a silver hub. We've got blue with a black hub. And today we're going to go with the premium needle, which is blue and chrome. So we're gonna do the same thing, except obviously this gauge face doesn't have the marks that we made. So what we'll need to do is basically just reference the old gauge face and these marks, and you can kind of eyeball it as to where they were. You're gonna want them, you don't want to press down like crazy hard, because you don't want the needle in the face to create friction, basically, or you don't want them to not spin smoothly, but you want it to be close so that there's not light bleed out of the sides of the needles. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to calibrate 100% perfectly, but just know either just reference these marks. Also, not a bad idea before you take it apart, just take some pictures. That way maybe a piece of tape falls off or something, you still have something to reference. I'm just gonna throw these on and just kind of roughly get them. We can add trans temp gauge. That's something that requires not programming, so that's something you can't do yourself, assuming you don't have some equipment to do so. In that case, you'll need to hire a professional to program your cluster for you. But what you can do is you can cover up that trans temp gauge with a little dummy, or a little spacer, I guess, like this. And so you actually won't see these seams because the edges of the lens will cover all of those edges, so you can't tell that this is a separate piece. So you can tape it on, you can glue it on. I wouldn't normally use masking tape, but just for the sake of time right now, we'll use masking tape. It's probably best to use like hot glue. All right, we got our needles on. Last but not least is the lens. We're upgrading again. We're not going to put our same lens on. We're going to put a Escalade lens with chrome rings. We also have an option with satin rings instead. So you just want to get the odometer, the trip button through the hole first. Line up the tabs. You want to make sure, especially if you're using the aftermarket needles. The aftermarket needles, the skinny ones, they're a little bit longer than OEM, and you can get them caught underneath the lens. So just kind of make sure you got those. Just make sure you're not pinning the needle between the face and the lens. So we're just gonna press together. And there we go. We are done. We have now upgraded our cluster to blue LEDs, blue premium needles, and a chrome Escalade gauge face. Hit the like or subscribe button for future videos or to see my other videos. To order parts, you can visit us at Tachtronics.com. That's Tachtronics.com. You can also contact me through the website there. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.